Graham, before we start, could you just make sure that everybody is actually in attendance, please?
Leslie, my boobs just got in the meeting, so we're getting everyone in.
So everybody's here?
Not yet, but we're getting them as they come on.
Thank you.
We're still waiting for... Graham, we're live now.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome to the February meeting of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. I would like to start by confirming that this meeting is being live streamed on the Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service YouTube channel. Following the meeting, a recording will continue to be available on this channel, and it is also being recorded should there be any technical difficulties. Yes. I'd just like to remind members of 4 key points. First, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera when not speaking. Second, feel free to turn off incoming video, as this may help if you have a weak connection. Thirdly, if you wish to speak during the meeting, please turn on your camera to indicate a wish to ask a question or make a comment. The chairman will be notified of all members who have switched on their videos. When the chairman does invite you to speak, please unmute. When voting, members will be asked only to indicate if they wish to vote against or to abstain from a vote. Where this is the case, the chairman will ask you to switch on your camera to indicate that you wish to do so. These will be monitored and brought to the chairman's attention. If you do not switch on your video, this will be taken as silent assent. The exception to this is when voting to agree the budget and the precept. This will be done as a recorded vote in surname alphabetical order. Before I hand over to the chairman, for the benefit of viewers of the webcast, Katie Nellis, the Democratic Services Officer, will read the list of members in surname alphabetical order. Please turn on your camera and unmute to respond when your name is called.
Thank you, Graham. Right, Councillor Carroll.
Camera's on.
Thank you. Councillor Christensen.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Exon. I don't think he's joined yet. Councillor Hall.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mallon. I don't think Wendy's on. Councillor Marland. No. Councillor McCall.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
I'm here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Minns.
Present but upside down for some reason. So.
Oh, you look okay from this side. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Present.
And Councillor Marland, I just saw you, so thank you. And I'll now hand over to the chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Katie. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting. Agenda item 1 is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 are the minutes. Shall we go through page by page? And they start on page 7 of the pack. So nothing on 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Are you happy then for me to sign these as a true record of that meeting? Is anybody against?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chairman's announcements. You've had a copy of my chairman's announcements. As you probably are all very well aware, Councillor Bill Bendish-Brown passed away on Sunday, and he was a member of the Bucks and Milton Keynes Fire Authority from 2013 to 2016. And I would like very much to have a minute's silence to for us all to recall what we remember of Bill. And I will ask you all to turn your cameras off and your microphones, and Mr. Britton will call us back into the meeting after a minute's silence. Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Britton. Agenda item 3, which I omitted, which I tend to always omit, disclosure of interests. Does anybody have any further interest to declare, either disclosable pecuniary interests that you may have not declared before? And if you'd like to, please will you do that? And please will you note that agenda item 7C, which is members' allowances, nor item 7B, the setting of the council tax precepts, require any member to declare an interest. Please do turn on your camera and unmute only if you need to declare an interest. Thank you. Agenda item 5, do we have any petitions?
Sorry, none, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
None, Chairman.
Agenda item 7, which is recommendations from committees, the executive committee. So if we would like to go to page 19 in the pack. Councillor Hopkins, do you want to start us off on this? And then,
thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will indeed. Thank you.
thank you.
Chairman and colleagues, as you know, the objective of the Prudential Code is to ensure that within the framework that the capital investment plans of local authorities are affordable, prudent and sustainable. I am pleased to note that the current capital programme meets all of these criteria. Furthermore, the authority has already made sufficient revenue provision to cover all future repayments of borrowing. However, there is no scope for early repayment of any of this borrowing due to the prohibitive early repayment penalties that would be applied. This paper is very technical in nature, and I'm sure Asif will be pleased to provide some further insight and answer any of your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hussain, would you like to update us on the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Good morning, everyone. As Councillor Hopkins mentioned, it is a technical paper. I guess the only bit that I just need to add on to that is the minimum revenue provision that we will be setting this year is at £47,000, which has been reflected in our existing budget for 2021-22. Yeah, it's the same that we've had for the past few years. So apart from that, like Councillor Hopkins said, it is a pretty much a technical paper, but just to take note that the minimum revenue provision is 47k. Happy to take any questions.
Mr. Suchbury, as your camera is on and you are now unmuting your microphone, I take it that you're going to want to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just for the record, it's in the paperwork. What is the amount of monies for the borrowings that it will it occurs to? What it actually accrues? Because for the record, and looking forward, the authority, I'm presuming its planning has absolute certainty be able to meet them borrowing requirements.
Mr. Hussain?
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, in terms of the outstanding borrowing, that's noted in point 2 of the paper. So our gross borrowing in terms of long-term borrowing is 6.7 million, or just under 6.8 million. And in terms of our finance lease, it's just under 1.6 million. As Councillor Hopkins suggested, we have actually set sufficient provision for the initial long-term borrowing. We've only now just setting aside 47k for the finance element lease. So that's stated in point 2 of the paper.
And lastly, is this in keeping with other local authorities' borrowings, other fire authorities, in the way they borrow money?
Yeah, just to be clear, this is borrowing that was taken out several years ago. I think the last time we borrowed some funds was back in 2010-11. It is in line with what the guidance states what we can and can't borrow for, and it was predominantly used to purchase capital or fund our capital program predominantly. We don't foresee borrowing anything in the near future, so that's our current program for the coming year.
Thank you for that explanation. It's just that we can see the paperwork, and it's always useful for the people to know that you've got complete control over our finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, members, do you wish to vote against or abstain on the recommendations? And Mr. Britton will read the recommendations for us.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a digest of the recommendations at pages 4 and 5 in the agenda pack, but for the benefit of viewers, the recommendations are as follows. 1, to approve the prudential indicators for 21-22, and secondly, to approve the minimum revenue provision policy statement. Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolutions are carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Britton. We now go to agenda item 7B. In my agenda pack, it's page 29. Again, Councillor Hopkins, would you like to introduce the item?
Thank you again, Chairman. This paper, colleagues, presents the revenue budget and capital programme, which follows on from the financial strategy approved by members last December. As you can appreciate, producing a budget this year has been especially challenging due to the unprecedented impact of COVID-19 on the economy and, in turn, public finances in general. Even at this stage, there is still some uncertainty regarding the amount of government support the authority will receive during the coming year. This will depend on, amongst other things, the outturn position on the council tax and business rate collection funds, which won't be apparent for a number of months. As colleagues will appreciate, these figures contain significant provisions for doubtful debts and potential appeals, and the finance team will keep a close track of this income during the coming year. With no flexibility to increase council tax above 2% without triggering a referendum, the authority is budgeting to use £1.1 million of reserves to balance the budget for 2021-22. ASIF briefed the Executive Committee last week that, in the light of updated figures received since the paper were published, he would be presenting revised appendices today. And I would now like to ask ASIF to present this paper and the aforementioned updated figures. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Mr. Hussain?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hopkins, for a really thorough summary there. If I can just go through some of our movements in funding we have seen since setting the budget for 2021-22, so we can just consider what we've had to kind of tackle through to this year to try and set our budget. So just focusing on the council tax first, we've seen a reduction in our council tax base by 0.65%. Just to give you a comparison, in previous years, we've seen our council tax base increase by 1.5 to 2%. This has resulted in a net reduction of at least 2% against what we would have expected without the impact of the pandemic. To counter some of this reduction, the government have announced an additional 670 million unring-fenced grant, which will be distributed to authorities in recognition of the increased costs of providing local council tax support following the COVID-19 pandemic. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service will receive 336k, which has been reflected in our projections under the heading of Council Tax Support Grant. In terms of central government funding, due to the pressures caused by the pandemic on government resources, the government has effectively rolled forward amounts within the settlement funding assessment for 2021 and increased these by the rate of inflation as at September 2020. The exception to this is the pension grant funding of 1.2 million, which is a flat cash settlement which will be included in future years' settlement funding assessment and subject to review as part of the anticipated 3-year comprehensive spending review. If I could just now take members to our MTFP process in terms of how we set our budget this year. In terms of our budget setting process this year, officers reverted back to the incremental budgeting approach when developing the budget proposal for 2021-22. With the projected reductions in council tax base and business rates funding, budget setting process was scrutinised by officers and members to ensure only proposals which added value for money were approved. Even with the budgetary constraints, this year's budget approach has identified some key opportunities, some of which are developing a leadership and management framework, continuing with the current establishment within the health and safety team to ensure that the service can respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, upgrading our ICT infrastructure. As well as opportunities, the MTFP projections have had to be revised following the comprehensive spending review announcements. As part of the 1-year CSR, the government announced public sector pay increases will be paused, excluding for NHS and those earning less than 24k. Therefore, no pay award has been built into the 2021-22 budget for anyone earning more than 24,000. If I can now share my screen and share the revised Appendix 1 following the updated figures.
Please do.
Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just to kind of take you through some key movements, one of the first changes that I've had to make in terms of the revised appendix is the council tax receipts deficit. The council tax deficit figure for 21-22 has been revised upwards from 24k to 33k, an increase of 9k. The deficit figures projected for future years have also been revised upwards following the confirmation from billing authorities. One of the key changes you'll notice that I've made is in this line here. Previously, this line had a figure of just under £8 million. The business rates figures have been reduced by 197k following the NNDR submissions by the billing authorities. Billing authorities and NDR funding include assumptions on the level of bad debts and increased provisions for appeals, which has led to the reduction in business rates funding. An element of this will be compensated on actual collections, which we can only forecast, and therefore I've set a prudent NNDR budget to reflect this. In addition to this, I've made some slight adjustments to the fire-specific grants, which reduced by 3k, and also due to the reductions in business rates, it's had an impact on the level of RCCO we can contribute in future years. Therefore, taking into account the changes that I've just mentioned, the net budget requirement still stays the same as before at 32.277 million. However, the overall funding position has reduced by 209k. Therefore, the use of reserves has increased from 904k to 1.113 million for 2021-22. Thank you. That's all I was going to go through today. Has anyone got any questions?
Councillor Suchbury, you're obviously wanting to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Set against the backdrop of where we find ourselves, through the Chairman, and we have a tax base of, you said, 32.7 million, and we are setting a tax base on Band D of £67 per household. which is the 1.9 threshold. We're using reserves of £1 million, and we're only getting £360,000 back with government support. And we've got roughly about a large amount of people, I forget the exact figure, who haven't actually paid their council tax. Looking at forward, because we must look forward, when setting the 2022-23 budget, is it sustainable to use reserves long term, and is it viable for us to keep using reserves without further government support in the long term to replace the obvious difficulties we're having to meet our long-term finances? Though the budget meets it, there is a forward drag on this. I hope that's not too long a question, but it carries much of the detail of what you reported.
I would like to just say something to you, Councillor Stuttery. You're probably very well aware that there's been a lot of work done by officers and lead members to try and increase the amount that we could claim for our council tax. And we were hoping this year that there'll be a 3-year spending review, or CSR, sorry. Yes. And unfortunately, because of factors that we're all very well aware of, that was made into a 1-year CSR. We are looking at a 3-year CSR next year. We're hoping that we will be given permission to increase our council tax more than the 2%. We're still working very much on that. So I think that until we know what's happening next year, I don't think that we can say that we will be using reserves. I'd like to ask Mr. Thelwell, the Chief Fire Officer, if he would like to explain to members what we're trying to do with the possibility of a referendum. Mr. Thelwell?
Thank you, Chairman. As members who've been on the authority for a number of years will know, we've been campaigning for a number of years to increase the council tax by £5 per year. And the chairman's quite right in what she says in the sense that actually next year we're hopefully going to get a 3-year settlement. If in the longer term it looks as though the authority is not sustainable, then we may have to consider a referendum going forward, and that's a political decision for members. We wouldn't be recommending a referendum this year at all. So just to be clear, there'd be no referendum this year and no recommendation of that. But we would need to think about whether we wanted to do a referendum to increase the council tax, to increase the precept by more than the 1.99%. That would obviously have to be paid for from this authority. I think it's in the region of £600,000 is the best estimate that we have. I think one previous referendum has been run in Bedfordshire County in terms of their area. So there is something about whether or not we want to put money away to consider that we may go for a referendum next year. But that's purely a political decision. But we do need to think about how we're going to pay for that referendum if members are inclined to go for it.
Well, thank you for that answer, but you didn't. The chairman gave me a very good answer about where we are, and her gut feeling about the future, which I respect. But what I didn't get is the 360k which we get from government, which is the nub of it. If government don't support the authority in the way that we would hope they would, this brings the challenge that you raised. But the referendum isn't an agenda item, it's a future item, and the budget we're dealing with today is the budget we deal with today. And I think it's reasonable to ask the question, is it sustainable long term? I know you've answered it in the round, but please can you answer it in specific terms without a bigger government support? By what you said, we need to go for referendum.
I think, Mr. Councillor Stuttery, I have answered your question in saying that it isn't sustainable. Hence, if we have to go to referendum because the CSR doesn't give us the ability to have £5 for our council tax, then we will have to go to referendum. And the request at this committee will be that we ring fence some money the £600,000, we will ring fence that from our savings, so that should we need it, we've got it there to use. We are still talking with the Home Office and with the Ministry of Housing and Local Government to see if we can actually agree that we get this extra £5 on our council tax. However, the suggestion is that we will be putting forward a recommendation that we ring fence £600,000 from our reserves to use for the possibility of a referendum next year if we don't get this extra £5 a year. So that will be something that we will be doing in this area. I think that we have answered your question. We know that we can't exist on our reserves. Once you've spent it, you can't use it again. We know that. And I think everybody knows that once you've spent anything, you can't use it again. So I do think that we have responded to your question.
I think we are in agreement, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Anders, you've got your hand up, and then I've got Mr. Thelwell again. Councillor Anders?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I was just thank you to Councillor Stutchery, because I normally raise the same point at this time every year. I would say I'm a little concerned about the idea of that we put our hopes into a referendum to try and resolve this long-standing issue, because we might spend £600,000 in referendum. I see absolutely no prospect of a referendum getting as a result that we can get the increase that we need. I just think if it's perhaps, and this is something we might want to discuss offline, if it's part of a lobbying tactic to kind of get us into a place with the government where they say, well, actually, we don't want you to have a referendum, therefore we'll support your £5, you request a £5 increase, I can support that. But frankly, the idea of spending £600,000 to get a result that's entirely predictable, people will vote no for it. Nobody ever voted for a higher tax increase. I don't think that's a sustainable option we should consider.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Anders. Mr. Thelwell.
Thank you, Councillor Christensen. I think the issue will be is that we'll know more about the longer term finances next year with the CSR. So that's the first thing. The second thing is actually, depending on what the financial outlook is, the authority will have a number of choices. And that will be to look at services, look at how we deliver the service, can we do things in a different way, etc. And actually, this authority has been very, very good in the last 10 years of coming up with innovative ideas in terms of how to keep the service where it currently is. But the reality is that in terms of referendum, there is the option and the opportunity, the option for the authority to choose to take a referendum. And as an officer, what we're saying, I'm not saying that we should do a referendum, but what I am saying is the option is there for a referendum. And most of the letters we've received back from the Home Office or MHCLG talk about the option to have a referendum on the precept. Now, whether members choose to take that option next year, that really is a political choice. But we, as officers, we must put forward that this is an option. So, and if we put forward that it is an option, then there is something about ring fencing any monies to ensure that members are in a position, if they are so minded that they wanted to take a referendum, that we could support that somewhat in some way.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Thelwell. Councillor MacLeod.
Councillor McCall. Just 2 points. I mean, obviously, finances are more difficult than they need to be by previous bad decisions. I know the decision made before many of us were on the authority, but the decision to make a council tax cut, we're still living with that pain, and that cut was made against officer advice, and that was a mistake that we're having to live with. Referendum, I think we may have no choice in the future but to have a referendum. actually, it's something that's happened. The thing about when you've been a councillor a long time, like myself, 25 years, is that you've got some historical knowledge, and they have actually had a council tax referendum in Milton Keynes some time ago. It may have been something like 15 years ago or something like that. Anyway, people actually did vote to pay more tax in that referendum. They were given three choices and they voted for the 9.99, I think it was. So people have been known to vote to pay more tax if they realise what the alternative is. And that's a debate for next year, as the chair said. But I think it's got to be an option on the table because clearly, as the chair and the chief fire officer said, you know, the contract, if we don't get more money out of the government, we've got to get money from somewhere. And the authority has got to keep its options open as much as possible. So I think keeping options open as much as possible is the right thing to do.
Could I then take it that you would like to propose that we put that £600,000, we ring fence that for the possible use of a referendum? Could I just tell members, and I'm sure that they're very aware, £5 is 10 pence, less than 10 pence a week. I don't think there's very much today that you can buy for 10 pence. And I'm sure that you can't buy the safety of your property and your family for an extra 10 pence a week. So I would just put it that the £5 increase that we are seeking is not an incredible amount of money in the scope of things. Yes, decisions made a long time ago are decisions made, and we don't know what the criteria was at that time to make that decision, and I don't think we can actually call into question those decisions because at the time that was the right thing to do, and we all voted for that decision at that time. So therefore, can I ask you then, are you proposing to put that £600,000 into ring fence? And if that is the case, we will need some wording. And I'm sorry I called you McLeod, Councillor McCall. I do apologise. So Councillor McCall, would you propose that we put that £600,000 ring fence?
I wouldn't like to take the role of proposing what we do from the administration, as it were, but I just making the comment that I think that as an authority that we need to keep our options open. Whether we put money in reserve now for it or whether we do that next year is open to debate. But I think unless the government forks out money, we're going to have no option other than to hold a referendum. And as Anders says, there is a risk in that because we could spend £600,000 on a referendum and not get the result that we want or we need. But I tend to agree with you, Chair, that given the options that the option of fire stations closing or spending, £5 more, I think actually people will go for the extra money myself. And it's how it's sold to people will be important.
I totally agree, and that is exactly my point. It has got to be properly explained. It cannot just be we want another £5. It's got to be explained why we require that. And there has been a lot of work done over the last 2 years to try and get this increase. Right, I have Councillor Stutcher again. Councillor Mills, you also came online. Was that a mistake, or do you want to ask a question?
No, I'd like to join in, please.
Fine. Councillor Mills, would you like to go first? Because Councillor Stutcher has had his shot first, and then I've also got Councillor Stephen Lambert. So Councillor Mills, Councillor Lambert, and I saw Councillor Marland, you also came online. Do you also want to ask a question? Obviously, are you still there?
Ask a question, make a point, yes, Chair.
Okay, I'll call you in a moment then. Councillor Mills.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was involved in a small way with AVDC's proposed referendum a few years ago, and we found that people don't really take into account all the valid points, which we make as members or as a council. Now, I agree that we need the £5. It's a question of how we go about it. But having a referendum, I think most people who are hard up and even worse off now because of the pandemic would just not bother to vote in favour of paying out the money, however much it is. So I agree with you. Yes, we can say it's 10 pence a week, but I'm not sure that anyone will actually listen to that and just say, oh, I don't want to pay any more money at all. And a second one, which is outside our control, is if another authority, such as the police, decide they need an increase at the same time, because they would go through, we could have, say, £5 for us and more for one of the other authorities, and they would just combine it, as we would have to do in a single referendum, which, all right, that would cut the cost because presumably that would be shared between us and another one, but the higher the amount, the less likely it is to be accepted. So I take the point made, I think it's by Councillor Douglas, about yes, we need the money, but whether or not it will go through, even for a small amount, I have real doubts about.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mills. I think this is where we have to make sure that the argument that we're putting forward is a good one. The police, as you know, are able to set their own precept. They have that freedom. We don't have that freedom. They can put in whatever they feel. So, but I think it's the story we tell that might actually show people the reasons why. I mean, we're actually talking about perhaps it might never happen, because if, as has been indicated, people are listening to our request. And I know the MP for Wickham actually brought it up in the budget bill last week in Parliament. Councillor Marland, Councillor Marland and then Councillor Lambert. Councillor Marland.
Thank you, Chair. I don't necessarily want to debate whether a referendum would or wouldn't pass, because I don't think that is the discussion in front of us. I think the discussion in front of us is the medium-term financial plan and the budget for the next 12 months. If you, Chair, are willing to propose the £600,000, I'm quite willing to second it to sort of at least discuss it and then vote on it at the end, perhaps as a separate amendment to the budget. What I would say is three things on the paper in front of us. One, it's quite clear, both from the Fire and Majesty Inspectorate report and what is in front of us, that the finances of the Fire Authority are unsustainable in the medium term, let alone the long term, answering Councillor Stutchbury's question from earlier. And whilst Milton Keynes Council is balancing the budget, our budget this year, using reserves, that's on the understanding that our income has fallen dramatically, and if only 25% of that income comes back, we will balance the budget next year. There's no such provision really in this budget. It is being balanced entirely on reserves and the premise of possible future funding, and that is unsustainable. And I think you've done a good job of outlining that. And therefore, the question in front of us is, are we going to put that money aside for a referendum, and why would we do so? And we are clearly doing so because the alternative to a referendum, if more funding is not forthcoming, would be the closure of fire stations. And it is as stark as that. And therefore, if we are ring fencing money from a reserve pot that is already available, and in 12 months' time it is not needed, then nothing has been lost. There's nothing set against that £600,000 this year that we would lose out as an authority in spending. And next year, if the budget is again unsustainable, and this discussion is a debate about whether we close a fire station or two, or not invest in new fire equipment, or have a referendum, then the funding is there, already set aside,
Yes.
that we can have that debate on its merits rather than on its financial drawbacks. And I think that would be the right thing to do. But on the actual budget in front of us, it is quite clear, and we'll put down a very clear indication that using reserves, not as a one-off, but to get us over the year with no real long-term plan other than a possible referendum or increasing council tax, is not sustainable. And that is a very, very difficult position, but preferable this year to closing fire stations. So if you're willing to move the £600,000, Chair, as a vote, I'm willing to second it and support it on the premise that what I wouldn't want next year is a debate about whether a referendum is financially viable, rather than whether a referendum is necessary to fund a gap in the budget over closure of fire stations or non-investment in new equipment.
I agree entirely. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Marland. We've got two other speakers and then we'll talk about the proposal. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Marland has virtually said everything I was going to say, including an offer to second such an amendment. It is one of those things, the fire service sector as a whole is being cash starved by the government, both in grant form and the ability for us to raise our precept to keep everybody safe, which is our reason for being. I look at our budget every single year since 2013, and I can see where we really have gone from top to bottom. We've done zero-based budgeting. We've looked at everything we can do. We are miles ahead of other services in terms of the way that we approach our pay structure. And you see, we've got the pay principles policy later on item 9. We look really. We haven't closed one fire station. We have reformed our working practices, and we brought our staff along with us to do that. We've done almost as much as we can possibly do within the constraints that we have. And pretty soon, if something doesn't give, we're going to have to give. And that outcome would probably look like closed fire stations, taking pumps off the run, or dare I say it, no more investment in people, because that's oftentimes, for many organisations, the first place the axe falls to save money. And as the lead member for People, Equalities and Assurance and Diversity, I wouldn't want that to happen, just putting that out there. So for me, it's prudent to put that budget to one side while we can, or an indicator of that level of budget to one side. We still have access to it should we emergency need it this year. It's not fixed in a bucket that we can't get hold of again, so that's a good thing. But we are right, at some point we are going to have to bite the bullet and say, if you don't give us the money, we're going to have to pay for this. And so Councillor Marland is right, that we are heading into that territory. And next year the landscape might be completely different, because we have what was supposed to be the annual the settlement, the financial settlement. What do they call it? The 5-year plan, the 5-year budget plan from the government. I can't remember what it's called now. CSR, Comprehensive Spending Review. It's constantly delayed, and so we don't know what we're doing from one year to the next, because the government only tell us 1 year in that year what's going on. So I do compare us to the Police and Crime Commissioner, who's putting his council tax up by 7% this year, and was able to do that time and again. Now, I'm not playing blue light services off of each other, but you can't continually starve one aspect of it, of cash, and bring it to almost the point of failure while you are refinancing the other aspect of the blue light service, because we work so closely together. You just have to look at the Blue Light Harbour and other plans about how we work together and how we attend incidents together to know that we're integrated as a blue light service offer to the public. So we need proper funding, we need better funding, and we're going to have to put our plans and our money where our mouth is, and this is an opportunity to do so, and to be cognizant of the fact that we work in a risk-based organisation, and the risk is that we are going to run out of revenue at some point if we don't do something about it. So putting that to one side this year, I'm very happy to along with Councillor Marland, to support that as an amendment to this paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lambert. Councillor Stutchbury, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. There's been really good points made. The one thing that we are not wishing to see going forward is the loss of our main resource, which is our staff, our second resource, which is the ability to deliver an equal and fair fire service to Buckinghamshire, across Buckinghamshire. Buckinghamshire is an unusual shaped authority and Milton Keynes together. What we can't countenance is the situation where we wouldn't forward plan for those eventualities. We are, as you quite eloquently said, Chairman, hoping the government will act in a proper way and recognise the good budgeting, the forward planning, the steps we've taken, and the additional things that the fire officers and fire service do on behalf of the public. When there's been a bar set, Buckinghamshire Fire Authority has stepped over that bar and gone beyond it.
Yes.
I think it's about time the government stepped beyond its bar and recognise the work that's gone in Buckinghamshire Fire Authority and all those people involved in it by not necessitating the need for a referendum and step in. But I do agree with Councillor Mallon seconding it, and I do agree with your premise, Chairman. We cannot risk the well-being of our residents, and we have to be careful, like you said, a very careful explanation of the realities of what happens. 10p on the council tax is better than the terrible situation that we could have, and let's not speculate about that. But the idea we'd have to redraw the lines of where we deliver services and who and where we take that cut would be a butchery beyond what we wish to do, and it would divide people within the authority, and it would divide Buckinghamshire as a community, and we don't want to go down that road. So I will be supporting the amendment because it's the right thing to do in the long term.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chairman, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said, and indeed Councillor Marland and Councillor Lambert have set out the position very, very eloquently, as they always do. The thing I would say is that today, I think the thing we need to be concentrating very much on are points 1 and 2 in the recommendations. And we must be mindful as well that point 3, if I can just very quickly read it, says, note that a referendum may, that's a crucial word, need to be considered for 2022-23, depending on the outcome of the comprehensive spending review. Now, I think we're covered. I don't think we need to be, quite honestly, ring fencing £600,000 or any other sum at this point. You and I and the other members of the executive and the finance team are working incredibly hard, both with the monies that are available to us and in lobbying through our local members of parliament, through the Home Office, through the Chief Fire Officers Association, etc., etc. And we will continue to do so. And I hope we don't get to a position where we need to even be considering a referendum. But if we do need to be, then we will make arrangements to hold that referendum at the appropriate time. But I'm not entirely convinced, although I won't vote against it, I'm not entirely convinced we need to set aside £600,000 as part of this recommendation today. I think we're sufficiently covered in points 1 to 3 inclusively on page 31. And I think that covers us for all options. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hopkins. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I believe it gives us our argument a little bit more traction if we were to actually show that we're ring fencing money for a possible referendum. And I would like to propose, therefore, that in our little 3, that we do add some wording for that. Perhaps one of the officers could actually come forward with some wording. We do need to look at that. It just gives us that extra bit of, dare I say, va-va-voom, so that, we do mean what we're saying. Heaven forfend that we would have to shut anything because we're using our reserves. We do need to make sure that we protect the families and the people of Buckinghamshire. Mr. Hemming.
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to what's being said, can I propose a form of words that members may wish to consider for a recommendation 4 based on what's being discussed? I would recommend that if members are so minded, that recommendation 4 be that £600,000 is transferred from the existing earmarked future funding reserve to new earmarked reserve, the purpose of which is to hold funding for a potential referendum in a future year. And as councillors have said, that earmarks the money, but should it not be needed next year, it doesn't mean that it can't then not be used for something else.
Exactly. I'm happy to propose that. Councillor Marland, are you happy to second that?
I am, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take recommendation 4 as we get to it. Mr. Britton, will you like to read out the recommendations, please, on page 31?
Thank you, Chairman, members. If we take recommendation 1A, B and C on block, and I'll read those out, and that will go to the recorded vote, and then we'll go on to the other subsequent recommendations. So recommendation 1A, to note and have due regard to the report and statement of the Chief Finance Officer, bracket C section 8 of Annex A, bracket. Recommendation 1B, approve a council tax precept of £67.16 for a Band D equivalent property, bracket, a 1.99% increase from 2020-21 equal to 2.5 pence per week, bracket, and the revenue budget as set out in Appendix 1. And for clarity, Chairman, I propose that where we say Appendix 1, we say Appendix 1 revised as at 17th February 2021 to make it very clear that we're looking at the proposals that were considered at today's meeting presented by us, as opposed to what was presented at last week's executive. And finally, at 1C, to approve the capital programme as set out in Appendix 2, and again as revised as at 17th February 2021. So, Chairman, that taken on block, that is recommendation 1, and that will be taken as a recorded vote. So I'll hand over to my colleague Katie Nellis to do the recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr. Britton.
Thank you, Graham. So I will read out the list of councillors alphabetically, and if you cannot respond with for, against or abstain. So Councillor Carroll.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Christensen.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Exon.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Marland.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Minns.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Walsh.
For.
Thank you. Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members. Mr. Britton, would you like to take us through the next 3 recommendations, please?
Certainly, Madam. And just to confirm, the budget vote was unanimous. Moving on to recommendations 2, 3 and 4, the new recommendation 4. The second one is to not hold a referendum. I'll take these in block, Chairman. Not hold a referendum to increase council tax above the 2% threshold for 2021-22. 3, note that a referendum may be needed may need to be considered for 2022-23, depending on the outcome of the comprehensive spending review. And the new 4, which is that £600,000 is transferred from the existing earmarked future funding reserve to a new earmarked reserve, the purpose of which is to hold funding for a potential referendum in a future year.
Thank you. Is there anybody voting against? Is there anybody abstaining?
Chairman, no members indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. Those resolutions are carried.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Britton. Thank you very much indeed, members. We now go on to item 7C. This is members' allowances, and I will ask Mr. Britton to take us through this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, members. As a standalone fire and rescue authority, the authority has a wide discretion in adopting an annual scheme of allowances. The only proviso is that the authority must have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panels of its 2 constituent councils. These are appended as appendices A and B, which are at pages 51 through to 81 of the agenda pack. The proposed scheme of allowances for the year 2021 to 22 is appended as Appendix C, which is at pages 83 to 92 of the agenda pack, and is based on a 0% increase from the current financial year. I should mention, members, that last night I noticed that Appendix C in the pack is not the same one that was presented to the Executive Committee last week. It is the same in all respects, except that on the last page, the last paragraph at the foot of page 92, about indexation for 21-22 has crept back in from an earlier draft. However, as set out in the executive summary of the cover report at page 47, the scheme of allowances has been linked to the NJC annual pay award for firefighters since 2012-13. However, the recommendation is that this indexation be suspended for 21-22 rather than apply the 2% increase. So members, with that miscreant last paragraph removed, there are no other changes proposed in the annual scheme. Unless I can assist further, the recommendation is at page 5 of the agenda pack.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Britton. Councillor Marland, you put your hand up.
I have. It's a question of clarity as to whether suspended means deferred, i.e. we are suspending it for 12 months and at this time next year it will be backdated and then next year's allowance possible increase would be put on top of it, or whether suspended means not taken at all, and that next year's and that this year's ultimately last year's point will be the base that will be discussed next year. Because while I'm willing to support completely not having an increase, I'm not willing to defer it and then just take it at a later date, because I think they're two separate things. So a bit of clarity would be helpful.
You are quite right, Councillor Marland. Mr. Britton, would you like to answer Councillor Marland's question, please?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Councillor Marland. And for clarity, the recommendation is to adopt the scheme of allowances at 21-22, and that is a 0% increase. And it's up to members next year what they choose to do, but it's not, if the members were to choose to link it again, it would not in any way be backdated, because the scheme of allowances is at the beginning of this year. So it's a 0% increase with no intention of having a retrospective index linking should members choose to take a decision next financial year.
In other words, no backdating, Councillor Marland.
Thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Just an observation, Chairman. I've got no problem with what's said, the decision, and they're not backdating. But I do think it's important for clarity that we put the exact amounts. I know they can be found on the website, but they are more public, what councillors receive in allowances. I think it's only appropriate. The Chairman does a lot of work and the committee people do a lot of work, and I think it's only people can get to recognise what they're being paid to be undertaken. And I think openness and clarity about money is always a really good thing. And I think we should make it known, because we're not taking it. We're standing shoulder to shoulder with our financial decision we've taken earlier. And we're also being open about what we receive. And I think those two things build up trust, especially if we have to discuss in a future year the necessity, as we discussed earlier, of a referendum. Better, to be honest, at the onset of these things, and people do not then confuse your motives.
Thank you, Councillor Suchbury. I think we've always been upfront and honest about members' allowances, and I believe that also we are showing that we're supporting those members of staff that are getting an increase this year. As we know, anybody below £24,000 in salary will be, but it was felt that members would forego for this year their increase, and it will be debated again next year, and it'll be up to the committee's decision next year as to whether we take that 2% or whether we don't. But I do thank you for your comment, Councillor Suchbury. So, Mr. Britton, would you like to take us through the recommendation on page 47?
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation is to adopt a scheme of allowances for 2012-22, as set out in Appendix C, and as I described, and as will be minuted, the paragraph about indexation will be removed. That was an erratum. So that's the recommendation.
I think you meant 2021, not 2012 to 2020.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
But yes, 2021. Are we all in agreement?
Chairman, there are no members indicating a wish to abstain.
Thank you very much indeed.
Vote against. That's carried.
Thank you, members. We now go to agenda item 8, which is on page 93. And Councillor Hopkins, again, seems to be your shout today, doesn't it?
No, Chairman, it's your shout, and it's so good to have you back after you were poorly last week. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, this report is being presented as the authority is required to approve the Treasury strategy each year. There are no significant changes proposed to the strategy, other than to reduce the forecast income budget from £150,000 to £30,000. This is as a direct result of the Bank of England reducing the base rate to 0.10% in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will now ask Asif to present the paper, and I'm sure he will take any questions as and when they arise.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I think you've kind of given a really detailed summary again there in terms of the strategy. It is a requirement for us to set an annual Treasury management strategy, which we have. The key bit that I just wanted to touch on is actually there isn't any material change from last year. And the bit that Councillor Hopkins touched on in terms of investment returns and stuff, that is a real change that we're going to see probably in the foreseeable future until the Bank of England interest rates increase. That is a real hit on our revenue budget. So in the past few years, we've received interest returns in the region of around 150 to 190k for the last few years. We're now projecting to receive, at best case scenario, 30k. In real terms, you're seeing that as an impact of around 150k on our budget. So it is a real impact that we've just got to monitor. But obviously, our focus has always been on liquidity. So that's what we'll maintain to ensure that we've got sufficient funds to be able to pay our suppliers and staff. And after that, any residual balances will be invested. But it's just to let members know that we won't be probably seeing the level of returns that we have seen in the past few years until the base rate obviously increases in the foreseeable future. And once that does, we can assure members that we will then revise our budgeting for return on investment and obviously update it accordingly. That's all that I was going to mention in terms of the Treasury strategy. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. With the impact of Brexit and the European banks, will we be looking at investing in European banks, particularly the German banks, because they do have a bit of an issue at the moment? So I just wonder if you have anything to say on investments in the European market.
Yeah, we haven't actually since I've joined the authority, we haven't really invested, and that was several years now, invested outside the UK. Just to reassure members again, we haven't invested outside the UK in the last financial year as well. We're not planning to invest outside the UK. I think firstly, like I said, liquidity is the main bit in terms of ensuring we've got funds available. And then usually we tend to go with local UK counterparties that we tend to invest with first. We'd only consider outside if obviously it met our risk criteria and the level of return suggested that we had to, but I don't foresee us investing anytime in the near future outside the UK counterparties.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hussain. Mr. Britton, would you like to read the recommendation, please, on page 93?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and get my numbers in the right order this time. It is recommended that the authority approve the Treasury Management Policy Statement, Treasury Management Strategy Statement and the Annual Investment Strategy for 2021-22. Chairman, there are no members indicating a wish to vote against or abstain. That resolution is carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Britton. We now go to agenda item 9, and that's on page 107. And Councillor Lambert, it's your go now.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm actually not going to speak very much because the report actually stands for itself, but there is some really good stuff in there, as the executive summary says. I'm actually going to hand over to Faye Mansfield, who is primarily the author of this, and a huge personal thanks to Faye and to the team for pulling this together. This wasn't a quick and easy piece of work to do, and so I really appreciate it's there. And I know it's an annual thing, but I just want to put on record my thanks for doing this and everything you and the team do to support me and the portfolio as we go through all of these people and personnel changes and policy updates. So thank you. So thank you, Chairman. Over to
Thank you, Councillor Lambert. Over to you, Faye.
Thank you. So the pay policy that's being presented today is required to be updated each financial year and is being presented as the 2021-22 pay policy for the authority. The pay policy is based on the current 2021 pay policy. However, for this year, the statement has been significantly updated with additional sections added and further clarification provided to ensure that it remains relevant and fit for purpose. As an overview, the following changes have been made to the statement. So we have a wider introduction with a statement of principles for the authority, and this reflects the reward and recognition policy that we have for the authority. Section has been added on legislation, responsibilities and scales, including the establishment budget and establishment numbers as at December 21. And then there's a section on determining levels of pay with wording again that's been taken from the reward and recognition policy for the authority. In the pay structure section, the pay awards are detailed for the previous year. This is something that we've not had in the pay policy before. Allowances and payments have been separated out into sections, and additional elements have been added on market rate supplements, relocation expenses and pensions. In the pay multiple section, the highest paid and lowest paid salaries and the median salary have been added. And in the payment on termination of employment, additional wording has been added on redundancy and settlement agreements. And an additional section has been added on re-employment and pension abatement. And this statement now states that the authority will consider re-employment, however, is not an automatic right and will be strictly based on organisational need. In the past, the pay policy has only said this has been in exceptional circumstances. When we look at the specific sections of the pay policy and the pay multiples and the ratios of the highest to lowest paid, it continues to fall for the 9th year, which is really positive, and seeing this 9th year ratio improve by 2% from last year and 28% since 2012. Within the last 3 pay policy cover reports, a note has been made on the introduction of the public sector exit payment cap. The restrictions of public sector exit payment cap regulation 2020 came into force on the 4th of November 2020, which restricted exit payments to 95,000. And this has been incorporated into the statement which is presented today. However, there has been legal challenge to this, and following legal action and an announcement made on Friday the 12th of February 21, it confirmed that the government's decision was to revoke the cap on the public sector exit payment, which was implemented in the 4th of November 2020. The Treasurer has published guidance which encourages employers to pay employees who were made redundant between the 4th of November and the 12th of February the amount they would have received if the cap had not been stated. And I can confirm that this is not applicable for the service, as there has been no one in this position. Following the announcement that was made on the 12th of February, it's proposed that the last two paragraphs of section 12 of the pay policy statement, as detailed on page 122 of the Fire Authority's papers, to be removed. And therefore it is recommended today that the pay policy statement, with the minor amendment on the exit payment cap, is approved for publication effective 1st of April 21. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions, members? No. Mr. Britton, will you take us to the recommendation, please, on page 108? Oh, sorry, Mr. Britton, I was too quick. Councillor Stutchbury, you obviously have a question. I don't know what we do without you. I really don't.
Thank you, Chairman. I love your compliment. Thank you very much. You're trying to throw me off my step. Not literally, obviously, but metaphorically. No, I do think it's worth noting when agreeing this report, and I think we should note it as members, that it isn't us who are choosing that our staff don't receive an increment. I think it's worth noting that this is a edict from government. It's also worth noting that is against a situation where they didn't apply the same rules to themselves when it came to their own pay policy. So
I don't think we need to be political. We're talking about the Fire Authority, Mr. Stutchbury.
I do think going forward, we need to seek assurance within a future report that this situation isn't going to continue, because in a county like Buckinghamshire, the report has done a good job. What it can't recognise is future trends. Buckinghamshire is a very expensive place to live. Without increments for our employers, it will be a more expensive place for them to live. It makes working for the authority less buoyant. So I do think we need to put a note in this, at least saying that it isn't our idea that they don't get a pay rise, it's theirs. And I think we should be clear about that, because I can't imagine anyone, if they do, I'd be surprised, not thinking that the planned increment, which was being agreed, the 2% agreement, was the right one.
Are you making a proposal, Mr. Stutchbury, and do you have a seconder?
I am proposing that we put a statement in there that the government's increment and choice on pay is their choice. It wasn't the intentions of the Fire Authority members to not give the fair agreement which had previously been negotiated. I think we need to have a clear separation to show that we are supporting our employees, which I think that would be across the board, and we look for the government returning.
Do you have a seconder for that proposal, Mr. Stutchbury?
I don't know, can't see anyone.
Councillor Marland, you've raised your hand. Councillor Marland?
I reluctantly second it, Chair.
You'll second it. Could you say your proposal again, Councillor Stutchbury? Oh, hang on just a second. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've reread the policy while you were speaking, Councillor Stutchbury. This was an audit and statement of fact about where our pay has been, our pay multipliers, our ratios between the highest and lowest paid. It doesn't say how or what we should be paying people, aside from what is in the schedule for the paid grades. We look at pay every single year. It's sometimes it's handed down to us. Sometimes we get a chance to negotiate it ourselves, and we do that as often as we can. This is a statement of our principles and policies. I think what you're trying to do there is shoehorn in part of what was in a previous item about budget proposals and remuneration. So I don't think the two actually work together. This shouldn't need adapting, because this is actually a good news report about taking a good look at the organisation as it stands, having pay policies and principles in place that are legislatively correct, as Faye pointed out, and also to help us understand when we do recruit or make people redundant, that we do that within an agreed policy framework. It is not about whether we would or not pay people X amount of pounds. It is about how we do make our decision making and what we currently look like and what we're forecasting to look like for 21-22 year. So I don't think, I know where you're coming from, Councillor Stutchery, but I don't think this is an amendment that is necessary or needed for what you're trying to achieve, I think.
Well, thank you for that, Councillor Lambert. I take that's not approval of the amendment, but the amendment was quite simple, and it was an observation of fact. It was not a criticism on the report. The report, as I said, was a good report. It's just something that I believe, and that's why I put the amendment. You're perfectly within your rights to vote against it. You're perfectly in the right to disagree with it. It's just a statement of fact.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Councillor Marland, in the knowledge that this is about the pay policy, do you still want to second Councillor Stutchery's proposal?
I think, Robin, we should probably see the writing on the wall, and it probably should have come during the budget discussion, because that's where the pay was decided, and I think it was even referred to in terms of 0%. So maybe we could just remove it and move on. And I think we've made the point now, and I'm sure it will be minuted, which is more or less the same thing.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Marland.
I take on advisement what you said, Peter, but I did enjoy saying it. Thank you.
Shame you didn't take advice from others, Councillor Stutchery.
I always take advice from my mother.
Yes, bless her. Mr. Britton, I don't think we have any more questions today. Mr. Britton, would you like to take the recommendation, please, on page 108?
Thank you, and I thank Councillor Stutchery for his intervention, because it enabled me to scribble down an amendment, an officer's own amendment to the recommendation. So if I read out recommendation 1 with the proposed officer's own amendment, the recommendation 1 is that the pay policy principles and statement are set out in Annex A, with the minor amendment of the removal of references to the public sector exit payment regulations as the statutory pay policy statement for 2021-22.
Is everybody happy with that recommendation?
Yes, Chairman, I am. I'm happy to have that amended in as part of the paper from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Britton? Yes.
Sorry, I was hitting the wrong button. And the second recommendation is that the pay multiple ratio continues to fall for the 9th year running, with the 9th year period seeing the ratio improve by 28% since 2012.
Ah, you're 2012, Mr. Britton. Any abstentions? No, that recommendation is carried, I think.
Those recommendations are carried, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we go to agenda item 10, and that is on page 129. And we have Area Commander Callum Bell. Are you going to give us a small update, or are we going straight to Phil Mould?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll give a very, very brief introduction before I bring Phil in. So, thank you, and good afternoon, members. You may recall me saying previously that the tragic events that took place at Grenfell Towers on the 17th of June, Grenfell Tower, apologies, on the 17th of June, were the genesis for a range of changes for a variety of organisations. We have chosen to take a twin-track approach as to how we prepare, position and respond to those changes, and how we provide updates to the authority. The information paper today that Phil will present shortly is focused on the Building Risk Review Programme and the Protection Uplift funding. In a few weeks, we will be presenting a paper to the Overview and Audit Committee on our progress against the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 recommendations and how we have been using the infrastructure funding towards addressing those recommendations and others that we have felt necessary. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Phil to go through the paper that we presented today for information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Callum. Good afternoon, Chairman, members. The purpose of this paper and accompanying appendices is to provide an overview of 2 Home Office funded protection programmes. The Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government, MHCLG, has established the Building Safety Programme to make sure that buildings are safe and people feel safe now and in the future. Following the Grenfell Tower fire, the government has banned combustible materials in the external walls of high-rise residential buildings of 18 metres and over. And following a review into its effectiveness, is now consulting on extending the ban significantly further, including lowering the 18 metres height to 11 metres. In March 2020, the Home Office Fire Protections Board first building risk review exercise focused on ACM, aluminium composite material buildings. This was successfully completed by all fire and rescue services. This service reported back on 1 known residential premises which has ACM cladding. I'm happy to report that remediation work on this premises has started this month. The next phase of the MHCLG work to be undertaken involves 2 protection programmes. The Building Risk Review Programme, the BRR, which will deliver a review of all high-rise residential buildings over 18 metres, with a commitment to deliver this by the end of December 2021. And the Protection Uplift Programme, which is to drive improvements in local protection capability. Both programmes have been supported through Home Office grant funding. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service have received grant funding of £60,000 to support their work for the Building Risk Review. This was based on there being 32 residential buildings in scope. However, due to the work that we've already undertaken, our records identified we had 71 premises above 18 metres, 57 of which are residential and fall within scope. Over a third of these buildings have been triaged so far, and subject to COVID-19, we are on target to complete this programme by the middle of 2021, so well on target. The Protection Uplift Programme is set to bolster fire and rescue services protection capability and delivery. This service has received a grant of £123,000 to support based on 2,393 premises according to MHCLG. And the types of premises these include are apartment blocks over 11 metres but under 18 metres, registered care homes, registered houses of multiple occupation, hotels and so on. I would open up to members for any questions.
Do members have questions? Surprise. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to ask your question?
Well, firstly, Chairman, through you, I thank the officer for the report. And secondly, I'm relieved the information that the one building we have is getting dealt with. And I'm also grateful for the information about the numbers of between 71 and 57 properties that we've got over the height. But do we, looking forward, Chairman, believe that the findings and complete findings of the inquiry are going to be robust enough? Do we have to realise this has gone on?
Mr. Stutchbury, unfortunately, we don't have any input into the findings of the Grenfell inquiry. We just have to see what the outcomes are. And as we know, it's taking some considerable time. I understand your worry, but I don't think that we know yet what the outcomes are. So I thank you for your question, but I don't think we can have any answer.
I haven't actually finished it, with respect, Chairman. Thank you for your always intervention. What I was asking is, noting the report, at the earliest point, when the inquiries are complete, can I be assured that a further report will be brought to this, noting any changes and recommendations from that report? I know officers will do that as a matter of course. That's the question.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Stutchbury, I can assure that we will continue to, and our plan is to continue to update members on the matters around the building risk review, the protection uplift and the infrastructure activities.
I expected no other. It's just that it's my duty to ask.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, you have a question.
I do indeed, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the report and for the progress being made. I think there are two elements to this broad issue at the moment. One is to do with fire safety, which is what we're discussing today. And the other, of course, is this ongoing impact, the financial impact on leaseholders on buildings, especially buildings that don't quite match. The government has put 3.5 billion into the former, which is very welcome. And I think is offering loans to help deal with some of the other issues, which I think is, in my opinion, is an inadequate response. But that's not for us here today, as you quite rightly say. I think there are still ongoing issues to do with wooden balconies, which I don't think funding is addressing. There are ongoing issues with wooden cladding, which I don't think this funding is addressing, because I think it's addressing other forms of cladding. And there are also ongoing issues, not just looking back, but looking forward. And it is, I think, absolutely imperative that we as a fire authority do lobby strongly, both Milton Keynes Council and Buckinghamshire Council, to ensure we have a seat at the table when development proposals for high-rise buildings in particular are being brought forward. We have an application coming forward in Milton Keynes for the redevelopment of Saxon Court in the city centre. It will be an iconic building, but the fire authority has to be at the table discussing all the fire safety issues from day one. We can't be involved retrospectively, and we can't be asked at some later date to offer some viewpoints. We have to be there right at the start. So those are the points I wanted to make, not just looking backwards, but actually looking forwards as to how the fire authority can be absolutely involved in ongoing developments, especially iconic building developments, landscape building developments, landmark building developments, I mean, for the likes of Milton Keynes and the other major settlements in Aylesbury.
I agree entirely with you, Councillor Hopkins, and we've had this conversation quite often. And I have asked for a letter to be written to both the planning departments of Buckinghamshire Council and Milton Keynes, asking that we do become a statutory consultee on high-rise buildings. I appreciate that with the planning changes made in December, some of these residential properties could just happen. But Mr. Bell, I know that you've now had this discussion, and I'm sure there is a letter waiting to be sent. Am I right?
There is a draft letter waiting to be presented tomorrow as part of a briefing for consideration.
Thank you. And perhaps we can put that as part of the proposal then, or the recommendation is that a letter is sent to both planning departments of Buckingham Council and Milton Keynes on behalf of the Fire Authority to become statutory consultees in buildings. I heard Mr. Mould say 11 metres. Would it be better to say 11 metres rather than the 18 metres? Mr. Bell?
I think that's a matter we could discuss in terms of the detail tomorrow, given the additional scale that would add to it. But I'll get more than happy to discuss that in more detail tomorrow.
Okay, so one of the proposal then, just to add to the recommendation, that a letter goes from the Fire Authority to the planning departments of Buckinghamshire Council and Milton Keynes to request to become statutory consultees in planning applications. I hope that members will support that, because I think it gets us at the table, as Councillor Hopkins has suggested. Yes, Mr. Britton, would you like to put forward the recommendation, because there are no other...
Chairman, I think Councillor McLean may have a question.
Oh, I haven't seen his hand up. Sorry, Councillor McLean, I missed you.
I didn't put my hand up. I did what Mr. Suchbury did. You switch my camera on.
I didn't see that.
Thank you very much. And as someone who sat on the Development Control Committee at Milton Keynes Council for many years, I very much support the additional recommendation that you're adding. I think it's very helpful. My point is very specific. In the comprehensive report that we have in our papers, on page 155, there's a table 3, number of buildings in scope for £10 million funding. In Buckinghamshire, we have one religious building. Does either of the officers know where it is?
So I think one of the issues with the MHCLG provided figures, Councillor, is that they've taken it from the gazetteer and it hasn't been overly accurate. So we are aware of a number of religious premises that have sleeping risks on them. We believe the one highlighted in their figures relates to a nunnery to the south of the county.
So we're not. The fact I'm sitting about 1.3 miles from a convent is not. That's why I asked the question. So that worries me. That, as you said, Phil, that you're working on data provided by MCHLG, and we need to make sure we cover all of those types. It's important. So,
sorry, Councillor. If just to reassure, although that's the figures provided by the MHCLG, our own internal data team have got really robust information, and that is what we're working from.
Okay, that's good news, Phil. Could it be possible to publish your numbers against this table? So not detail, but that when we've got that line of 476,209, etc., across what we think, and just to say that I'm sure you are on top of it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Could we possibly have an updated, updated figure so we understand exactly how many buildings we're looking at in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, please? And perhaps that could come out, in the next few weeks. Yes, thank you. Mr. Britton.
Thank you, Chairman. If I just go first to the proposed additional recommendation, just to check I've captured that correctly, and then that can be voted upon. The way I've captured it, Chairman, is that a letter go from the authority to the planning departments of the constituent councils requesting that it become a statutory consultee in the planning process, and I've left the last words as follows: for certain types of premises, because just taking on board Mr. Bell's comments about the devil may be in the detail. So if members are happy with that and would accept that, you could put that to the vote, Chairman.
Are we happy with that and the recommendation?
Chairman, no one's indicating a wish to vote against or abstain. And the other recommendation, just for completeness, is that the services approach to the BRR be noted, Chairman. And I think we can take that as carried also.
Yes. We do have an update on the pensions outcome, which Mr. Britton will be taking us through now. And Mr. Britton, would you like to give us an update on the information that you received yesterday? On the McLeod Sergeant case?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. I want to take a few minutes to update members on an important matter that was touched upon at the end of the Executive Committee meeting last week, and it relates to the McLeod Sergeant ruling, which is mentioned by Asif in the executive summary of his report on the MTFP. A little bit of background first. It's just a reminder that the upshot of the litigation brought by the FBU against the government in 2016 was that the Court of Appeal on the 20th of December 2018 ruled that the transitional protections introduced with the new Firefighters Pension scheme in 2015 were unlawfully discriminatory on the grounds of age. There then followed an Employment Tribunal Remedies hearing on the 18th of December 2019. The result of that Employment Tribunal hearing was the issuing of a declaration that, pending the final determination of all of the remedies issues, those that brought claims in England and Wales are entitled to be treated as if they remained in their former 1992 pension scheme, Firefighters Pension scheme. The government announced on the 25th of March 2020 that it was developing proposals to address the unlawful age discrimination identified by the Court of Appeal. in the 2015 pensions reforms to the firefighters' pension schemes, and that it would take steps to remove this discrimination retrospectively. It confirmed that this would apply to pension scheme members regardless of whether individuals had made a claim. The government consulted on proposals to remove this discrimination in 2020, and I understand from recollection that the Executive Committee made submissions through its Director of Finance and Assets on the options that were presented by the government. And on the 4th of February this year, the government issued its response to the consultation, indicating its intention to proceed with a deferred choice underpin to remove the discrimination for scheme members employed by fire and rescue authorities during what's known as the remedy period by creating new legislation. The remedy period is defined as between the 1st of April 2015 and the 31st of March 2022. The remedy only applies to members who were in service on or before the 31st of March 2012 and who continue to be in service on or after the 1st of April 2015. Whilst amending legislation is awaited, there are in the region of 15 firefighters employed by the authority, ranging from firefighter through to principal officers, who would become eligible to retire on ordinary pensions before the 1st of April 2022 and before the necessary legislation is enacted. These individuals have therefore been caught in somewhat of a limbo. In the meantime, the authority, together with all fire and rescue authorities in England and Wales, were respondents to the same claim issued against the government by the FBU in 2016. The defence to that claim was coordinated by the LGA and was finally heard by the Employment Appeal Tribunal on the 16th of December 2020. The defence being run by the LGA was that fire and rescue authorities were essentially piggies in the middle and had no choice but to implement the pensions changes that had been approved by Parliament, thereby relying on the statutory defence to age discrimination in Schedule 22 of the Equality Act 2010. The FBU argued that sections 61 and 62 of the Equality Act 2010 obliges employers to apply the pension regulations in a way that removes any discriminatory effect, and therefore there was no defence available to the fire and rescue authorities. What I want to bring to the authorities' attention today, Chairman and members, is that the Employment Appeal Tribunal judgment was handed down last Friday on the 12th of February, so it's very recent indeed, and that's why we were unable to consider the matter last week. The Employment Appeal Tribunal has ruled that Section 61 prohibits fire and rescue authorities from acting in a manner which discriminates on the grounds of age, and the defence provided by Schedule 22 of the Equality Act 2010 is not available to this authority or any of the other fire and rescue authorities. It ruled that under the proper interpretation of Section 62 of the Equality Act 2010, fire and rescue authorities have the power to pass a resolution to remove any discriminatory effects in the statutory pension scheme. It is therefore proposed that a meeting of the Executive Committee should be convened in order that it can give effect to the ruling of the Employment Appeal Tribunal by passing the necessary resolutions to remediate the position of those of its employees caught in limbo and uncertainty as to their pension entitlements before the 1st of April 2022. Once that extraordinary meeting has been convened, more detailed information will be able to be provided, including whether the LGA is likely to appeal the ruling and details of some of the technical and administrative challenges that will need to be overcome by colleagues here and at our pensions administrators to ensure that firefighters receive their proper entitlements. A resolution passed at this proposed Executive Committee meeting should also help crystallise some of the provisos and assumptions that have been made in the authority's retirement succession planning. Chairman, that's what I wanted to bring to the authority's attention, because it is a significant development in this ongoing litigation, and I think it is a matter that does need to be remediated by the appropriate resolutions of the Executive Committee.
I think in light of what you brought forward, Mr. Britton, I think that we ought to have an extraordinary meeting of the Executive to discuss this. And I hope that in due course that you'll come back to us with a date for that. So if you could put together an extraordinary meeting for that so we can discuss this fully.
Certainly, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we go to the last agenda item, I wish to put on record my, and I'm sure your, thanks to all our officers and members of staff who have taken part in putting in place the COVID vaccination centres across the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority area. Also, all the assistance offered to our partners by our officers and staff. And I have to say I'm extremely honoured to be the chairman of such a superb service that does so much for the residents that we look after. I hope that you would all support that, because I think what we're doing is absolutely superb.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that we, for those people that have gone to look at the vaccination centres, the way they're set out and the compliments that have been given to me and to others and people I know that have had the vaccinations in how well run it is, compliments must go to the service, and perhaps Mr. Thelwell will pass that on to everybody. Thank you. Would you like to say something, Mr. Thelwell?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll convey that. I mean, the whole organisation has tried to pull together to help the community during the during this pandemic, and we're really proud of every single thing they've done. I must also record actually our thanks to the local authorities, Milton Keynes Council and Buckinghamshire, that they've been fantastic actually in terms of briefings 3 or 4 times a week, every week, and they've done a fantastic job as well. So I'd like to record my thanks to the chief executives for all of their staff for what they've done the last couple of months as well, last 12 months. Thank you.
I think we echo your sentiments. Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 11 is the date of the next meeting, which will be Wednesday, the 16th of June, 2021 at 11 a.m. And that will be the annual general meeting of the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for attending, and stay safe and have a good rest of the week. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chairman.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.